Okay, so welcome everybody. We're live on air. It's a very sunny Wednesday now. It was a little bit grey this morning, but it's brightened up and is a gorgeous day here in London. And I'm Lisa Barnwell, and this is Bumps in the Boardroom, a global conversation on the pregnancy advantage for business. And I'm really delighted today to be welcoming Traci Alford, who is one of our based in Singapore. And it's really great to have some personal perspective on the talk of the value of the pregnancy mind and the value of the pregnancy experience, which is what Traci is going to bring to today's conversation. Because we've been talking very much, we've looked at the scientific sort of aspects, the changes that we know for sure from Victoria Bourne, who I was talking to yesterday, on what really happens to the brain and the changes in the brain, and this morning with Geraldine Gallagher talking about maternity coaching and the value of that and her vast model, which was really interesting. And on Monday we talked a lot more about the sort of intuitive, creative side. So without further ado, I'm really delighted to welcome Traci. It's the evening there. So thank you, Traci, for joining us at the end of your day.
No problems.
How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. And so our paths crossed 2 or 3 years ago now. We were just saying it's been almost a couple of years since we've connected. But you came to me when you were 7-8 months pregnant, and you were working for Shell at the time in London. Can you just kind of set the scene for everybody and let them know kind of where you were in your career at that stage?
Sure. So I would describe myself as a late mother. I had Rose in my 40s. And so I also have still, a developed career, so a senior career, a global career based out of London. So as part of that role, I had to do an extraordinary amount of travel. Now, Rose actually came along as a bit of a surprise. Mm-hmm. She wasn't planned, which was an absolute delight for all of us. But I think for that stage in my career, to be honest, initially I would say I was in a bit of denial because I hadn't really thought what that would mean. But as the date gets closer and you start to dialogue with the business what that means in terms of who's going to take care of your business while you're away, the length of time that you're going to be away. I mean, you don't have to state exactly what it is, but, you know, within the year, what that might look like. So that all sort of kicked off. But Rose, actually, she arrived a little early than anticipated. She was 5 weeks ahead of schedule, which for me was a little bit stressful, mainly because I like to be incredibly planned and very well organised. And I think from a physical perspective, I think there was absolutely no issues with that. But I think where I got caught a little bit by surprise probably was more in the emotional side of things and the mental preparedness of what it takes when you have something so special and so little sort of that enters into your life ahead of schedule.
Yeah, kind of thrown at you literally, you know, suddenly
Exactly.
one day you're at work and the next day you have a baby. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, it was pretty fast. So just going back a couple of steps, you said you started kind of dialogue with your company about your pregnancy and about the kind of exit and the re-entry. How early on in your pregnancy did you start to do that?
I did that. I actually, again, I'd managed a lot of people who'd been pregnant before. I'd had a lot of peers who'd been pregnant. So because I was in slight denial, I probably left it a little bit later. Plus, I also physically didn't show. So I actually started at about the 5-month mark. So I went to my boss and said to him that I had a surprise, what it was, and how would we go about planning to ensure for all parties that everything would be managed well and planned ahead. So the dialogue was with him. He went away and thought about it, I went away and thought about it, and then we started the process of who would be my maternity cover during that time, what that person might look like, whether that would be an individual from my own team or whether that would be an external person outside the team. So I just started discussing that with my boss. I also, at that point in time, notified the HR team. And we do have what I would call more of a mentoring support program rather than a formal sort of program around maternity leave. But certainly we have a website with details and outlines of some of the questions and some of the things that you should be thinking about as you enter into that process. And certainly also some of the legal requirements as well around that.
I mean, there's obviously the legal side, but I think, as you say, when Rose arrived, slightly unexpectedly, our paths had crossed, and we'd set up a plan between us to kind of prepare you mentally, emotionally, and physically. And I think we managed a couple of those sessions, before Rose made her entry. And I think that was obviously something that has been open to discussion about when is the right time to take sort of maternity leave and when to step back. And I think starting that dialogue as early as possible is often the best thing to kind of lead into that. And yet a lot of women do put that off for various reasons. As you say, because you're not showing, because you're working it out in your own head, you're not sure how everybody's going to react. And I think that's something that, if we can be more embracing of that, then actually the longer we have to plan, the easier it will be, because you were planning a reasonable amount of maternity leave before she was due, weren't you?
Yes, so basically I had literally ended on the Friday and she came on the Wednesday. So in theory, I would have had those 5 weeks, and also I was reasonably physically fit. So I personally just it didn't even enter my head. Plus, she was also my first child. That Rose would come early, but I would definitely recommend that you do have the dialogue when you're ready to have it with the business, because it makes the process a whole lot smoother.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think having a supportive person to then talk to, we talked earlier this morning with Geraldine that, every manager can be different, and what they're doing with their maternity coaching is really working on supporting the managers. And as you say, you've had a lot of experience from your peers and people up above and what have you going off on maternity leave. So I think the more experience you've had, the more understanding you have, again, the better prepared you can be for that process, and that can make a real difference.
Definitely. And I think as you say, the empathy levels vary significantly from individuals, and you may not necessarily get it from your line manager. I was fortunate, I did. In my personal experience, I got it from my line manager, and I also got it from a number of people in the business. And one of the first things he said to me is, here are a number of people who have done exactly what you've done, why don't you go and talk to them? So in a company the size of ours, clearly there's going to be a lot of women who've gone on maternity leave. So that, talking to someone who's done it before, I think makes a significant difference, or multiple people.
Yeah. And when you say done it before, are you relating to done it before as in having a high-powered job, having a lot of travel, coming back to work afterwards, as opposed to, done a pregnancy before?
I'm talking about both. Because generally speaking, not everyone, but a lot of people in the business do have big demanding. I mean, Shell's a very virtual business. We function very much globally. And so it wouldn't be abnormal that you wouldn't be able to speak to a number of people. Now, is there a significant number of women at very senior levels? The answer is no. So you will find them normally more at the mid-range. As I said, I think one of the contributing factors was my age, in terms of, I think that's one of the challenges. The more senior you are, generally the older you are, and I think that was one of the challenges that I had in particular.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was reading actually, there was a quote actually from Emma Bridgewater, who was talking about working mother's guilt, and, just talking about her experiences in pregnancy in the papers recently. But there's been a lot of talk, if you're in that mid-level management, that actually that can often be harder than when you're a little bit more senior. I know Karen Brady, when she was talking about her experience when she was, a young mum at 23, had she gone through the experience a lot later, it might have been different, because when you're at that senior level, you've got a more flexible role generally. Although you've got a lot of demands on you, you're very respected, you're trusted, you're valued as a member of the team, and there's sometimes a bit more leeway. You've got more support, you've got a team around you, you've got PAs or whatever. Whereas when sometimes you're at that mid-level management, that can often be the hardest when you're on the way up to then try and juggle. And I think giving women at that level a lot of support, I think is really key. I think that's definitely something to look at.
I would agree with that, because certainly, I mean, the first message the business gave to me is, we want you back. So what do we need to do to make sure that you do come back? And you're absolutely right. You have bigger teams, you have a bigger base, you have the opportunity to be slightly more flexible, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing. If somebody says we want you back, we value you, and that's the experience quite a few of my clients have said. If they feel that, then the loyalty they have to transition elegantly out and get back in is much better than if there isn't that sense of we're really keen to have you. So I think that's one key thing for employers, if they really value their employees to really sort of look out for them. But in terms of fast forward a little bit. So Rose arrives, and you said, you didn't really have a lot of time to mentally and emotionally prepare. As I say, you were very fit from my perspective for the women I see, and in great shape. But in terms of the mental and emotional side of things, how difficult really was that for you?
It was certainly a challenge, and I think there were a couple of things that I found demanding. One was the physicalness, was the sleep deprivation. I found that, very demanding, on top of the fact that I think I'd totally and utterly underestimated how much this little bundle of joy would mean to me. So it was quite an emotional sort of journey. Plus, because she was premature, she was tiny. Yeah. She required feeding every couple of hours. It was a very demanding.
It was an intense period, wasn't it?
Exactly. And I think, in terms of what I would take from that, I would say that's probably, putting aside the stresses I have at work, they're not comparable to that. That was a very stressful time, because, I don't know if anyone's done Myers-Briggs, but I'm an ENTJ, which means I like to be incredibly prepared. I like to be very organised, but I also like, big picture stuff. And, all of a sudden I'm disorganised. I'm focusing on an extraordinary amount of detail just to get through, these blocks of time for my day to survive. So it was very challenging for me personally, very challenging. For the first, I would say, definitely the first 8 weeks in particular were very demanding.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot. You're quite atypical of a lot of the clients that I work with, who do have that sort of view of the world and like to be organised. And I think as it is the mental and the emotional side of things that can really be quite difficult. The tiredness is certainly a factor that affects everybody. But I think that being in control and then not being in control and feeling like you're learning all over again. You've gone from being in a senior position where you're kind of the ropes, to actually just being completely like a headless chicken sometimes, trying to get to know your child, and it's a very steep learning curve, can be a massive change. And I think something I feel very passionate about, and what came up in my talk with Victoria yesterday, Dr. Bourne, was that the brain actually changes quite a lot in pregnancy, and certainly the 3 months before, the logical, organised sort of data side of our brains actually really slows right down, and the right side, the creative, the intuitive, really opens up. And the purpose of that is so that you actually let go of all the sort of detail, but open up to that intuition, that inner knowledge, that inner knowing, and can sense what your baby needs, and get to, they say after a very short time, a mother can distinguish the different crying sounds that the baby will make, and you can look at your baby and know, is it time for a feed, is it time for a change, are they grizzly, what is it? And that's all because of these changes that go on in the right side of the brain. And she said that there's a real peak about 3 months before, until about 3 months afterwards. So when you're still working, you're still in that very logical, organised sort of world outside, it can be very difficult when you've suddenly got to then go into that more intuitive state, and you're having to kind of connect in with that side of yourself very quickly. And I think that's where all the emotions then come from, as well as the shock. I mean, it's quite a shock really to the system when you give birth that fast. And I've seen that with my clients several times. I mean, we can smile about it now, but it was pretty shocking.
Yes.
You know, as much as she was a welcome arrival, you know, it's not so you know, so easy when it's literally just sort of arriving. But yeah, that's what I've seen, certainly with the brain, and I think that's something that we don't really connect with very much. You know, we focus on, as you say, you were physically fit, so I think there's that sense of I'm fine to carry on, I'm coping quite well, but actually the mental transition, the emotional transition from letting go of that side of things which actually up until, you know, you have a baby of your own, your career is really your baby. You know, you put your love and your heart and your soul into it, you know, and you're generally very connected to it. So it's almost like you're leaving one baby behind and embracing a new. And so to be able to transition out of that more smoothly is something I'm really sort of campaigning for, really, and to try and just bring more awareness about. Because when I see women who are able to do that, it's a far smoother process. And I know that it was kind of taken out of your hands, and you did plan that. But I would like to see it even, you know, from kind of 6-7 months being that really much smoother transition. Because from a company's point of view, you're not as capable of making all of those decisions generally in the way that you would normally, because there is this change going on. And although I see many women who kind of fight through that and say, oh, it didn't really happen to me, the facts are there. You know, this is what happens to your brain. So you can train yourself to ignore those creative signs, but actually, is that really a helpful thing for anybody to do that?
And I think in hindsight, I mean, again, I lost 5 weeks, but in hindsight, I definitely should have spent a little bit more time starting to run down, sort of, you know, get more into that mode. But that's easier said than done when all you've ever done
Definitely
is managed a career. This is what you've always done, and you, quite frankly, you just really don't know any different. So I think education in that space plays, you know, has a huge amount of value. And I think when Rose was actually born, to a certain extent, I think my stress was I continued to fight that. So I did really strange things. So at 4 weeks, Rose had 2 passports, and she was a citizen in 2 countries, because I felt like I had to, you know, I had to get up in my day and deliver, which is, you know, which is ridiculous, because she wasn't going anywhere. But I felt that I still needed to produce things, because I was used to getting up every day producing physical things, as opposed to just. And I think
producing milk, that's enough. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's why, sort of, once I let go of that a little bit and just said, you know, this is going to be a period of time, that I think that's when, you know, I think probably my relationship with her improved, but also I just started to enjoy it significantly more as well.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing, you know, being able to enjoy that, because it's such a special process, and such a special time, and you know, it may not happen again, so, you know, and it won't happen with that baby again, so it's a very, very special time. And I think that's the thing, and your sort of attitude is very common, you know, where, and I think so many women, when they are so in control, almost feel, you know, it's quite scary sort of heading for that. And, you know, you hear the stories of it, of how it's going to be, but I think there's a lot of, oh, well, it'll be different for me, and I'll have that kind of licked in a couple of weeks, and, you know, and it's almost like we don't allow ourselves just to step back, just to have some space. And that's definitely what I'm doing more and more in my work now. There's been a real evolution of what I'm doing, because I'm working with more senior women, is that what they come to me for is that space, is that kind of holding, and is that slowing down to actually help them transition. And so I'm not sort of advocating that women stop work necessarily at 6 months, but definitely starting to really slow things down, really allow some space to come in, to transition, because then I think it becomes a more joyful process all round, but also just a much smoother process all round, you know, and whether that leads to, you know, a more positive birth experience as well.
But also, I think support in that space. I think you have a lady that you're speaking to later on in the week in terms of like, there is enormous pressure that you are the superwoman. You have the career, you have a child, you have a beautiful, well-kept house, and everything comes in this bundle, and it's all fine, and nobody shows any cracks. So I do think that, we do owe it to ourselves to, I think, be, a little bit more honest as well. To be honest with our employees, but to be honest also with each other, because I think that's that support and that help's very important.
Definitely. And something we were talking about earlier, actually, and this has come from stories that my clients have told me, is there's a real competitiveness amongst women as well of being able to manage and keep going in their pregnancies until the very last moment. And actually, not saying, actually, I'm going to step back and step down. And the women that do, whether it's through their own choice of just wanting that space or whether it's on medical grounds, have said, I faced a lot of shock from people at work saying, oh, really? You're going on maternity leave already? When actually we should be saying, great, good for you. That's a really smart move. That's well planned. That's going to give you that lovely space. But we don't. We look at it in a very different way. And I think it's because we're a society of sort of achievers and performers, and it's all about, go, 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 as opposed to an ebb and flow, and recognizing, okay, this is a time to actually kind of withdraw and to allow yourself just to have some sort of quiet time, some private time, some time just to be nesty, to be homely, and then you will actually rise out of it. And that was something that certainly has come up in other conversations, is that when you allow that space, the sort of rebirth, as it were, afterwards can be really powerful, but it becomes a much easier process when you've given it the space to do that.
Yeah.
So I know you said you had a great mentor actually at Shell, and that gave you a lot of support to actually make the right decisions. Were you chatting to him both pre-birth and afterwards?
So pre-birth. So he did sit on the main board. He's now retired, but he was fantastic. I went to him and kind of just went blur, and he just said, why don't you just relax, talk me through it. And he just said, look, you need to focus on this time, it's really special. And he said, and then he gave me milestones. So 3 months, 6 months, just to connect back into the business. Don't do work, but just stay afloat, whether that be reading press or whatever it might be. Just stay connected with the business, and then once you decide your time frame for re-entry, then reconnect with your line manager and start to sort of get back into the process again, and then even start to join meetings, but just sort of pace yourself. And from my personal experience, I don't think anyone should re-enter a business under 6 months, because I don't think that's good for the individual, and I certainly don't think it's good for the business. I mean, I can tell you I categorically would have not made great decisions in that time, because I was dealing with so many other things. So so certainly that would be my perspective. But yes, he was fantastic in terms of stage gating me through. And in the other challenge I had during my maternity leave is that we moved country. So on top of that, I talked to him about that. The plan was I would re-enter back in, and then we would move country. And he just said, I don't think that's the right thing to do. And his view was, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but my attitude is if you get your house in order, your family's happy, you've settled, you've moved to Singapore, then you re-enter the business, you'll be much happier. And he said, if anything topples over, he said, we will lose, because you'll choose not to come back because you'll put your family first, sort of thing. So he said, and we don't want that to happen. So extend your maternity leave. We are comfortable with that. Then return when it makes sense for you personally. So yes, he was, in particular, as I said, my personal experience has been very positive.
Yeah, and it sounds like smart words, wise words from somebody who's been through that process and seen it many, many times. And I think my experience of having a mentor in my life has been invaluable. And I think having somebody, as much as mentoring and as much as maternity coaching, having somebody that you can talk to who can give you that perspective and can give you another way of looking at it, because the norm would be, like you say, to kind of try and come back and get back in as soon as possible, but actually that wasn't the right thing for you, and it wouldn't have been the right thing for the business either. And I agree with the sort of not returning too fast. I've had a client recently who returned after 3 months, and she did that. It was her second child, and she did that very strategically because of various projects that were going on. And she did, to be fair, bring me on board a few months before her baby arrived, and then we worked 3 times a week in the 3-month period before she went back to work, to give her a lot of support, to help her do that. And but in terms of what Victoria was saying to me, I mean, I found her research fascinating, and they're opening up the parameters now. But they've seen that there's this real peak 3 months before, 3 months after, when your brain isn't as able to make those logical decisions. Then it's not to say that you can't make good decisions during that period, but there'll be different decisions. They'll be taking much more of a big picture overview. There'll be much more intuitive decisions, and they'll be much more instinctive. So, when you're in a business environment, I actually feel that sometimes we should bring more of the emotion and more of the intuition into our decision making. But, sometimes you do need to look at things a little bit black and white, and you're not actually in a strong position as a new mother to do that. Your brain isn't designed to do that. You're designed to go very instinctively to the fight or flight, and protect your baby. So I think we have this. I know we give a year's maternity leave. My sort of feeling is between that 6 and 12 months is when actually that's a time to really sort of transition back in and give a lot more support, because a year out can seem like a really long time.
Yeah, I would agree. So I was planning to return at the 9-month mark, and for me personally, if I had not been moving countries, I think that would have been the ideal time for me. In terms of, I felt very comfortable. I'd set up the right level of help for Rose, etc., etc. And I extended it to 12 months mainly because we moved. But I think, at the 9-month mark, I was ready. I needed the stimulation. I needed to get back in and, to be honest, get a sense of myself again at that point in time.
Yeah. And did you go back to full-time? Are you back now full-time, or what sort of hours are you doing?
I am back full-time, and I work long hours, but I manage my hours accordingly. So I get into the office sort of around 8:30. I leave religiously every day at 5:30. I come home and spend an hour. So it allows me to have breakfast with Rose. I bath her, put her to bed, read her stories, and then I get back online. So sort of effectively from 7:30 through to 10, then I will continue to have meetings and calls. And a lot of it has to do with the time zone, because I deal with people around the world. So that's part of my job. But the flexibility is that my team knows, everybody knows I don't have meetings during that time. If there's emergency, just text me. But generally speaking,
that's your time.
Exactly. And it's about being precedent. It's about being very honest, and a couple of people push back, and I just say, no, that's my time. That's not negotiable. And I think once people go, okay, she is accessible, but these are the times when she's not accessible, and they learn to accept it. But I also think you need to sort of create your own rules,
set your own boundaries.
Exactly, which displays a bit of give and take. So my take is that I give up some of my evenings during the week so that people have accessibility to me, and that's part of what I do.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and you obviously get a lot out of your work, you obviously enjoy it, and I think it is that give and take. And we were talking this morning with Geraldine about what real flexibility means, and there's still a kind of culture in certainly some industries of sort of this presenteeism, and of people showing up and being in the office from not 9 till 5, from certain hours, and when people do leave earlier, like you say, you leave on the dot of 5:30, it can be frowned upon. But actually actually, you know, from talking to a lot of working mothers, they get so much done in their day anyway. They're so much more focused and productive that actually, you know, they don't need to necessarily be in the office for those extra hours. It's not achieving anything unless, as you say, you've got to connect with other markets, other time zones, and then there's having that flexibility. So I think when your company trusts you as an employer, values as an employee, values your skill set and knows that you're capable of managing your time, then you can do that. And I think that's, you know, if companies can embrace that and be open to that. And you said Shell is a very virtual company, so they obviously have that way of thinking. And I would say that definitely benefits you and allows you to do it in the way that you do.
And it's a benefit not just for the women, it's a benefit for the family. So, you know, I have 2 guys in my team. They do not get into work in the UK before 9 o'clock because the mornings they look after the children and their wives work. So, you know, it's not just a gender thing for women. It's actually something for the family. I think that's really important that, you know, men also play a role. And I think, you know,
for sure,
one of the reasons why, you know, I feel comfortable going back to work is that, you know, my husband and I have a very honest dialogue about what works, what doesn't work. We both travel. We both have demanding jobs, and I think, you know, the companies need to be respectful of the family as the whole. It is not just, you know, the female that takes, it is the family.
Yeah, for sure. And that was something that we talked about this morning as well. And, you know, men being able to take a good amount of parenting leave, but also being able to, you know, be flexible as well. And I really support that because, you know, some families may want the dynamic of the woman having certain traditional roles and the man having the other. That's up to you as an individual. But I think if as companies we can embrace a much more holistic view and encouragement to be more involved in the childcare, then that's going to raise much more rounded humans as well, you know, much more rounded individuals. Because if it's all just, you know, the mother doing the majority of the parenting, then I kind of feel that kind of skews it as well. So I think the more integrated that you can be as you're moving forward, the better.
Definitely. And you need to be very disciplined. Disciplined and organised.
Yeah,
exactly.
United, I think, but also having an open dialogue, as you say, making time for that. And I think we're moving forward and we're changing the rules, but they're not moving, you know, things aren't moving perhaps as fast as we would like them to. But I think in certain industries, what I've discovered from sort of pulling this event together and talking to different industries is there are some industries that are really moving forward and are really open to this, and others that aren't. And so it's to look at that and say, why is that? Is it because of the structure of your business? Is it the nature of your business that forces you to be a little bit more rigid, or is it just because that's how you've always been? And it's tricky to make changes sometimes. It's hard to change, but actually, you know, if you can do something differently, perhaps why not? Because the benefits are there.
I think it's probably a number of factors. I think it's the value that people place on diversity. So if retaining your workforce and having a balanced workforce and making sure that women return after having children, then if businesses understand that, then they'll have programs and they'll support around that. The whole flexibility thing, I don't buy into. I mean, there's nothing more old-fashioned and rigid than an oil company. You know, it's not a Google. You know, it's not full of 24-year-olds doing their thing. But I mean, so I don't buy into the rigidity of things. I just think that's a mindset, and I think it's either the business hasn't bought into it, or the business doesn't understand the value of what it takes. I mean, just pure numbers. You know, retaining staff and getting a replacement for a staff is a very expensive thing to do. Let alone the diversity at more senior levels and what that brings in terms of different thinking, different approaches, dynamics of team, and ability to deliver whatever type of work that you do.
I mean, and diversity is something that it's a real buzzword now that we're all talking about, and you know, there's so many heads of diversity now in these companies that I'm talking to. But looking at accepting people with different genders, styles, whatever, but also different backgrounds, different needs, different family setups. For me, that's what being diverse is, and saying, you know, we don't have to all be the same. We don't have to all show up in the same way. You know, these are our overall goals and targets as a business. These are the things that we're working towards, but we can all come at it from different angles. We can all bring different things to the party. You know, it's like if you have a party, you don't all turn up with a dessert, or you don't all turn up with a main course. You know, you all turn up with different things, you know, so that you've got a nice blend. And I feel that that's how it works best in business, when everybody can show up with their own unique skills and actually then are able to move forward, rather than having a cookie cutter approach where we're all showing up with exactly the same thing, you know, and working in the same way. It doesn't, in my mind anyway, lead to a really successful kind of collaboration.
No, I mean, and there's lots of research around that, and I know in my own teams, just, you know, an all-male team versus an all-female team versus a balanced team just have totally different dynamics, and you produce different outcomes. The level of risk is different, people's behaviour is different. I mean, there's many, many different things, but I would say a balanced team, from my perspective, is a much more enjoyable team to be either to lead or to be part of.
Yeah, and I think it can be challenging. I mean, when you're working, I know for myself, I've had my own business now for, you know, about 10, 12 years. And I've also gone in and worked in consultancy positions with teams and managed teams of people. And it can be very sort of attractive to try and bring in people who are very like yourself, where you're very like-minded and you're all, you know, on the same page with things, but actually you suddenly realize there are big elements that you miss. You know, you're all looking at this side and you're not looking at the other. Yeah. So I've definitely learned, you know, as I've gone along, almost bringing people in who have the opposite of me, and it can, you know, take a little bit of time at the beginning for us all to see things, but actually, you know, it does make a much better process, and you know, it does come together. So, you know, it's for me that this is, you know, the pregnancy mind, valuing the pregnancy mind, valuing the journey of pregnancy, the journey into motherhood and the return to work is all part of a much bigger picture, all part of a much bigger picture to, you know, have a more diverse and successful workplace, and to have a more diverse and successful world, basically, where we're all kind of coming together. So, you know, it's something I'm very passionate about, and I really thank you for joining me in on the conversation. And I mean, if there's one thing that you would sort of say to women or to employers or to men, anybody who's going through this process, what would be your one sort of thing to suggest or recommend?
I mean, I think very clearly everybody manages this differently. So I think there needs to be a lot of thought into giving, I think, a structure or a program around it, but allowing people to choose what they need to do relative to how they manage or how they react to things. But I think out of all my experiences, including my own, there's nothing more efficient and more effective than a working mum. And I think, you know, they are by far the highest producers, and they deliver great work. So I think, you know, businesses should never forget that, and that's at all levels.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And that's, for me, you know, valuing that, I think is what I really want to see. So yeah, fantastic. So thank you, Traci. Thank you for giving up your evening, and
you're welcome.
Or for part of it, and for connecting with me. It's been lovely to catch up with you again, and hopefully we'll do that in person when you're next in London. But with the power of technology, we can do this hangout, which is fantastic. So thank you for your time, and look forward to chatting to you again.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.